of living in Paris. What were you able to see outside the window? Because you're not very far away from the Bataclan, where the siege and the hostage taking was happening.
You can see the police surrounding the area. There's all the police that are in their protective outfits with their shields and the shields on their face. And they were circling the building, but I think they've killed the 2 terrorists now, so I think at the moment it's like preparing to evacuate the hostages inside the cafe.
Yes, that's certainly what we're hearing, but we have heard that there have been possibly 100 people who've died as a result of that siege, with the elite police forces storming the building to possibly, that's certainly what we're hearing, attackers or gunmen having been killed in that. The advice that we're hearing from the mayor of Paris is that nobody should be going anywhere. I assume that you will be following that very closely.
Yeah, I don't. I'm quite happy on the 6th floor in the sky, not being anywhere near anyone. I don't want to go anywhere near what's going on down there. And I'm hoping that tomorrow I can go to Versailles to live with my aunt for the weekend, just because I don't want to be this close to it. But we'll see.
Again, that's perfectly understandable. Freedom Jackson, thank you very much for talking to us, and keep safe, stay with that neighbour. Let's just remind you of the latest that we're hearing. Police sources saying that 100 people are thought to have died inside the Bataclan concert hall. They've gone there this evening, a busy Friday night, a packed venue to watch a heavy metal band from California. And we understand that attackers, possibly certainly 2, maybe 3 or even more, stormed the building, shots were fired, and then within the last few minutes really we've heard that those who survived that attack have been making their way out of that concert hall. Well, the French President François Hollande was on TV a little earlier tonight telling the nation that terrorist attacks were underway on what he described as an unprecedented scale. He also announced a state of emergency and the closure of the country's borders.
2 décisions seront prises. 2 decisions will be taken. A state of emergency will be decreed, which means that certain places will be shut off, traffic may be banned from certain places, and searches may be conducted across the whole Paris region. The state of emergency will be proclaimed across the whole territory. The second decision I've taken is to close the borders. We must make certain that nobody may enter to carry out any acts, whatever they may be, and make sure that the people who have, alas, committed these crimes are apprehended should they leave the territory.
That was the French President François Hollande speaking a little earlier to the French people on television. We're getting some unconfirmed reports, and I must stress that. They are unconfirmed reports from social media, that the camp known as the Jungle in Calais, which is the home to many migrants who are trying to make their way across the Channel, that camp is on fire. The suspicion is that this could be a revenge attack. I would urge you to listen to that with a huge amount of caution. We need to get that confirmed by BBC correspondents, but social media reports suggest that the jungle camp in Calais, which is a meeting point for thousands of migrants trying to make their way from Africa and the Middle East, is on fire. And the suggestion is, and it isn't only a suggestion, that it's a possible revenge attack. I was also just reading on social media, Reuters saying that the French Foreign Ministry said that airports will remain open, that flights and trains will continue running, which is also just reading on social media. Reuters saying that the French Foreign Ministry said that airports will need a full explanation of how flights and trains can keep running, potentially, obviously across borders, unless these are just internal flights and internal trains. We need to have that explained to us. Let's speak to our correspondent Hugh Schofield, who joins us from Paris now. And a reminder, Hugh, that you were 100, 200 metres away from the Bataclan concert hall. We understand that the siege there is now over with a high number of casualties.
don't know anything about casualties, and in fact, as I speak, we're waiting at a police line for, I think, the prosecutor of Paris to come and talk to us, and he will give us here the detail, no doubt, of what has happened. I know that there are reports circulating, but you're seeing more quickly than I am, of a high number of casualties. I just can't comment on that, but there certainly is a sense that this is over here, because the police seem more relaxed, and there is this imminent briefing. A policeman has just come around plain clothes saying, be ready, because there's going to be a press conference coming up. I understand also that there's Hollande and Manuel Valls, Prime Minister, are in the area, touring some of the places which have witnessed the attacks, and it might be them. I can see in the distance. I can't really make out, but there's a group of officials wandering around, talking to police, and I'm hoping one of them will be the prosecutor, maybe even higher up, maybe even Hollande will come over and talk to us. I just don't know, but one does sense that it's over, and now it's a question of working out what has happened, what the toll is, and then then the big questions about what this all means.
Tell us what you're seeing now, because obviously the mayor of Paris some time ago advised people across the whole of the Paris region, a huge area of France, to stay indoors. But of course, people who are trapped, are trying to get out of the Bataclan concert, they've got to get home somehow.
Well, yeah, I mean, in the bars all around here, you can see that there are people behind the shutters just waiting. I think in practice it's loosening up. People are coming out and moving on now. I mean, in the immediate area around Bataclan, it's still very much locked down. But we're quite a way back now. They've pushed it back, and we must be 200 or 300 meters away from the scene of the action. And I think that word from Prefecture to people in the Paris region, stay at home, was very much in the heat of the moment when no one knew quite what was happening. I suspect as time goes by, and maybe already, they'll feel that something terrible has happened, but it's happened, and that there aren't others on the loose, and then this dreadful sense of sort of siege will ease off. I can't really judge where we are in that process though right now, whether they think they've sort of tagged all the terrorists and therefore what's done has been completed, or whether they think there are more people on the loose. I just don't know.
Hugh, for the moment, thank you very much. Well, Lucy Williamson is another one of our correspondents in Paris tonight. Lucy, you were also, last time we spoke to you, not very far away from the Bataclan concert hall. What are you hearing?
Well, the Bataclan concert hall is behind us along this road here, and we do know the assault is finished now. We're getting reports that some attackers, at least, have been killed in that assault, but we're also getting early reports from the French news agency here that maybe 100 hostages have been killed in the attack here. So we're still waiting confirmation on that, but if true, that's going to be a very, very bitter pill for France to swallow, and a very difficult thing for the President Francois Hollande, who we believe is touring this area at the moment or shortly. A very difficult thing for him to overcome and to try and instill a sense of security going forward.
Yes, of course, a huge risk even when elite forces are sent in to try to end a siege like this. I mean, it must be a hugely difficult call for the authorities to know what to do.
Sieges like this are notoriously difficult, trying to safeguard hostages' lives while dealing with threat. I know there is a protocol for this, but obviously we don't know exactly what happened here tonight, at what stage the casualties happened, or who was responsible. So I think out of everything that's happened here tonight, it's far too early perhaps to really get a forensic sense of how things unfolded. At the moment, the authorities here are still at the stage of counting the dead, trying to lock down the rest of the capital and really make sure they've got everyone they can in the network, they presume, that carried out these attacks.
Lucy, let me just pause for a second, because there is a suggestion that it was being reported on social media that there were some pictures of a fire at the camp known as the Jungle in Calais. It does appear that these were old pictures that came from some time ago. I did warn that we needed to treat those reports with utmost care because we needed to have it confirmed. It does appear that those pictures were old and not pertinent to tonight and anything that's been happening in Paris. So we'll set those to one side. A reminder, though, that the police are appealing on social media for tonight's anyone with any information about any of the attacks in those 7 locations that we know of so far, to contact them. Clearly there are multiple eyewitnesses to what's happened, because there seems to have been a multifaceted and a coordinated attack. Lucy Williamson is still with us live from Paris. And now, Lucy, the country is almost in lockdown, state of emergency, and the borders are supposed to be closed. What's that going to mean for people in France?
Well, I think it was President Hollande's initial reaction to a situation that very few people understood tonight. He, as you said that France was facing a series of terrorist attacks that were unprecedented here, and as you said, he called for a state of emergency, announced a state of emergency, also an assault on the building behind me, and yes, he has said that the borders of the country will be closed to prevent the attackers fleeing.
And he also called for military reinforcements. And since the Charlie Hebdo events of January, there was a greater security presence on the streets. How likely is it that that's going to be ratcheted up now then?
I think if the number of dead that we are hearing here is confirmed, this is really a game changer for France, and it's really something that's going to call for really quite radical, perhaps, thinking on how France can protect itself. After the Charlie Hebdo attacks, security was ramped up all across vulnerable sites, but the trouble with attacks like this is they often happen on soft targets, a restaurant, a concert hall, places that are very difficult to protect nationwide. And so I think that's going to be the challenge that faces the government in the days to come.
If we remember, after Charlie Hebdo, there were a couple of days, weren't there, where the gunmen in those shootings were on the run. We appear to have multiple attackers who the police need to trace. The city is going to be a difficult place to be for the next few days.
That's right. I think there are several attackers that police are trying to find at the moment, and there's obviously a great deal of fear in Paris as their whereabouts remain unknown. Of course, it raises very painful memories of the attacks 10 months ago when Charlie Hebdo was attacked, the siege at the Jewish supermarket, and the tense days that unfolded as police tried to chase and find everyone involved in those attacks. And I think, the next few days are going to be very worrying ones here for people in Paris and further afield.
Lucy, I'm just conscious that there's a great deal of noise behind you. Just want to make sure that you're okay, you're safe. You maybe turn around and tell us what you can see. Because there seems to be people moving.
I'm not exactly sure what's going on behind me, but there are a great deal of onlookers who have gathered here, and I think, yes, it maybe a skirmish has broken out amongst the onlookers, or perhaps with the police, but there are a great deal of security forces here, and some onlookers who are here on the street late at night here on Friday night.
Lucy, we'll let you go and investigate what's happening around you. For the moment, thank you very much, Lucy Williamson, near the Bataclan concert theatre, where that assault by police led to a number of people who've been held hostage being able to leave the building, but we do understand there are dozens of casualties. We need to have the figure confirmed. A man called Ben Grant is also in Paris at the moment. He was at the Belle Équipe restaurant in the city when it was attacked.
There was a shooting, I think we were told it was from people in cars. They opened fire on the bar. It's a lot of people. We're being led out of the building right now by police. So apologies if I have to cut off early. There's a lot of dead people. It's pretty horrific. To be honest, I was at the back of the bar, so I couldn't see anything. I just heard the gunshots. People dropped to the ground. We managed to put a table over our head to protect us, and just hold the fight here to finish. I and we were sort of held up in the bar because of the pile of bodies in front. It's too much for my wife to walk over, so we waited inside until just now we got let out. So it looked like at least maybe 7 dead people still outside. The amount of people that were injured was huge. I mean, it was one of those Caribbean bars with lots of people hanging outside having drinks, what they normally do in Paris. So it was really full bar at the time. We were just lucky to be all the way at the back, I think.
Who was in one of the restaurants that came under attack earlier this evening. Well, the President of the United States, Barack Obama, has been speaking about the Paris attacks as well.
Those who think that they can terrorize the people of France or the values that they stand for are wrong. The American people draw strength from the French people's commitment to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. We are reminded in this time of tragedy that the bonds of liberté, égalité, fraternité are not only values that the French people care so deeply about, but they are values that we share. And those values are going to endure far beyond any act of terrorism or the hateful vision of those who perpetrated the crimes this evening.
President Obama extending his condolences and words of support to the French people. Our World Affairs correspondent Richard Galpin is here. Richard, let's just pause for a second and look back on what we understand to have happened. It seems to be a multifaceted attack by a number of people in several different locations in Paris.
Yeah, absolutely, and people are saying this is the worst attack Paris has suffered for decades, perhaps even going back as far as the Second World War. What we know for sure now is that more than 100 people have been killed in just the one single location, the Bataclan concert hall, which apparently has seats for 400 to 500 people, and it was packed at this concert which is going on tonight. There have also been attacks outside the Stade de France, where the President François Hollande was attending a football match between France and Germany. Then we know for sure there have been attacks at a restaurant and a bar, possibly other locations as well. I mean, according to some reports, there have been attacks at least 7 different locations. And I think, standing back from it, what's pretty clear is that this was a very well coordinated, pre-planned attack. And also some eyewitnesses have been saying that they saw the gunmen opening fire. The magazines then ran out, they fitted more magazines onto their weapons, fired again at several occasions. So these are people who absolutely knew what they were doing.
And came well equipped for the violence they were intent on perpetrating. You mentioned the death toll. A Paris City Hall official being quoted by Reuters as saying that about 100 people were killed at the Bataclan concert hall, and the belief is that about 40 other people died in the other locations where we've seen these attacks tonight. There have also been reports that 2, possibly 3 attackers were killed by this elite police unit that went in to try to bring an end to this siege. This leaves France with an enormous concern over what do they do now in the next few days. We saw the reaction in terms of increased security in the sort of days and weeks post Charlie Hebdo earlier in the year.
Yeah, but more immediately, the fact is that there are still, we don't know how many, but there are several gunmen still on the loose. There's, did you say, maybe 2 or 3 have been killed at the Bataclan, but the other gunmen, we assume that they're still around in Paris, and the police will be doing everything they can to try and track them down. But absolutely, the question of security in Paris now for the next few days is going to be absolutely huge. And I think one thing we also have to remember is that after the Charlie Hebdo attacks in Paris back in January, which are absolutely horrific attacks at the time, President Hollande promised that they would improve security to kind of prevent these kind of attacks happening again. And lo and behold, here we are, 9-10 months later, and we've had even more serious attacks.
Earlier reports saying as well that there have been maybe 2 suicides and a bombing at the Stade de France. We obviously need to have all of these early reports confirmed. Richard, for the moment, thank you very much. Charlie Pitts is a freelance cameraman in Paris, and he was just 30 metres from a bar where people were shot just after 9 p.m. local time.
Gone in the 11th, about 75 metres from the Delicate Cafe, was hit about 10 past 9. I've just been to the supermarket, just walked past the front of the cafe. It's a popular, typical French cafe. People were sitting outside, and I'd literally got about 30 metres when I thought it was a firecracker to start off with, and then it went on, it got louder, and it went on for about a minute. Everybody sort of dived for cover thinking it was gunfire, and it went on for about a minute, then there was a pause for about 15 seconds, and then it all started up again. We all sort of and then it sort of calmed down a bit, so I walked back to the front of the cafe, and there was a whole pile of bodies, probably about 7 on the left-hand side, and about 4 that had been sitting at the tables outside on the right-hand side, and a lot of injured. I saw a woman who'd obviously been shot in the leg, and then the police turned up, and now we're sort of shoved about 75 metres away. A lot of fire brigade, a lot of police, a lot of army patrolling the streets, keeping everybody away.
Charlie, we're trying to get a sense of the geography of this, because obviously the different districts, the arrondissement in Paris, they sort of circle out, don't they, like a spiral from the very centre. We were just talking to a journalist who was in the 10th arrondissement, not far from you, where an attack happened on an Asian Cambodian restaurant. You're at this bar in the 11th arrondissement, but there's also, we understand, a hostage situation and potentially some casualties unfolding at the Bataclan Concert Theatre, which is also in your district.
Yeah, it might well be. The police sort of, told us all to get out of the streets inside, then told us to get outside onto the streets again. It all went quiet for a while, and then a whole host of fire brigade trucks and more police turned up. Sorry, I'm just being moved on by the army. Turned up, and it was a lot of activity down here. I don't know whether they think that somebody's still around, but there's a lot of activity down here.
How quickly were the emergency services on the scene?
The police turned up. Sorry, I'm just getting asked to move on. The police turned up very quickly. I was actually helping a woman who wasn't too badly injured, had a lot of blood on her. Hang on, we're getting moved off again. I don't know what's happening, but we're getting moved away. So,
do you know where they are trying to move you to, Charlie? Because obviously we're hearing that the French police have asked the public to, in the Paris region generally, to stay indoors.
Yeah, we're just being told to go inside, so I'm just going inside the apartment block. So, yeah, we've been moved inside now. The army have moved us inside, so I can't see what's going on, but something is obviously going on. They're going up the street, clearing everybody off the street.
Charlie Pitts, a freelance cameraman in Paris, with his view of what was happening close to one of the sites that came under attack tonight. Just a word from our Europe editor, Cathy Adler. She's just tweeted that France says it's mobilising 1,500 extra troops as a result of these attacks that we've been reporting on this evening. Nabila Ramdani is a French-Algerian journalist. She specialises in French politics and in the Middle East. Since you were last in here with me, Nabila, you've been on the phone talking to people, a lot of reporters and officials in France. What are they telling you?
Yes, indeed, and we still have an awful lot to learn about what is effectively an unfolding story, and it is very sinister and indeed macabre. I've spoken to government sources and indeed to the City Hall in Paris, who have confirmed that 140 people have been killed in Paris tonight, including children, and especially in the theatre where hostages were held. 100, it seems, have been executed one by one before a grenade exploded in the theatre. Police forces then went in, and apparently the French president is going to be on the scene as well shortly. The scenes in Paris tonight are ones of, a city and indeed a country under siege. and that's also reflected in the measures that have been taken by the government, and especially by closing off the borders effectively. There are curfews, there's a curfew implemented, and indeed a state of emergency, which didn't happen in the country since 2005 when there were riots.
And even then, some commentators have been saying even then it wasn't a countrywide state of emergency, so this takes it even further than 10 years ago.
Well, absolutely. At the time it was definitely targeted at stopping young angry people from going on rampage and destroying public property as they vented their anger against the government. But this is, we're talking about an absolutely, terrorist attack on a massive scale. To give you an element of comparison, the last time there was a terrorist attack that was, perceived as massive in France was in 1961, when 26 people were killed on the train by the OAS, which was an organisation fighting the government for Algeria to remain under French control. But what happened tonight, we're well off the measure of the 1961 attacks.
I'm just reading from Reuters, Nabila, that Belgium is now imposing new checks on its border with France, particularly looking at rail and air arrivals after these attacks. We know that the borders are closing, but at the same time we were hearing that France was still going to allow trains to run and flights to take off and land. I mean, whether they are just journeys that people will undertake within the country is not being made clear. But a massive impact on people if the borders are closed.
Well, yes, indeed, and I think it does reflect the atmosphere of confusion in France at the moment. Of course, it's very unclear as well what the government is trying to say by closing its borders. Is it trying to prevent people from leaving the country, possibly the people behind the attacks? Is it trying to prevent people from getting in the country to perpetrate further attacks? But what is certain tonight is that the movement of people will be monitored, and the French president has now to appear as to show some leadership and to try to reassure people, which is a very challenging task for him to do, and that involves, of course, means of transports which are extremely hard to monitor.
A very difficult balance, isn't it, for decision makers to strike. They need to keep people safe and even to have visible signs, 1,500 extra troops on the streets, and supposedly not just in Paris but in France. But you don't want normal life to grind to a halt.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you have to give the impression that people can carry on with their lives as normal as possible. But under these circumstances, it's very clear that the French government will have questions to answer as far as, what are seen as massive security failures. It's impossible to convince people that they can, start leading a normal life again, especially as soon, so shortly after what were major terrorist attacks back in January against the Charlie Hebdo offices and indeed a kosher supermarket in central Paris.
The other issue, I suppose, as well, is if it turns out that any of these attackers, and we don't know how many we're dealing with in these multiple sites, if any of them were on a watch list, if any of them had been known, because of course it's not inconceivable, is it, for these people to be acting alone, a small group of people who maybe in their minds allied to another group somewhere else, but not necessarily known to the authorities.
Well, you're quite right to raise this very important point, because as what happened with the Charlie Hebdo attacks, the terrorists involved were in fact known to the authorities, and as often people who do perpetrate these kind of attacks are known to the authorities. But it has to be said that in France they are often on a watch list, but they often let off and they slip off. The authorities give up on keeping an eye on them, as it were, and that will absolutely be held against President Hollande, who has tried to firm up security measures after the Charlie Hebdo attack, dare I say, by trying to step up security measures through monitoring the internet, monitoring the expression of extremism online, but also by passing surveillance laws, much stricter surveillance laws, in spite of oppositions from human rights organisations, for example. And clearly this hasn't been enough in terms of intelligence.
A great deal of statements and condolences coming in from leaders around the world, and now here's Angela Merkel's statement, German Chancellor. Of course, I'm deeply shaken by the news and pictures that are reaching us from Paris, she said. We also heard earlier from President Obama and David Cameron expressing similar sentiments. Angela Merkel goes on to say, my thoughts in these hours are with the victims of what appears to be a terrorist attack. And just another note, I've just spotted via AFP that the Turkish president, who was voted back into office with a majority only last weekend, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, offered his condolences as well following these attacks tonight, calling for a consensus of the international community against terrorism. He went on to say, as a country that knows very well the manner and consequences of terrorism, we understand perfectly the suffering that France is experiencing now. How well does France cooperate with other countries when it comes to sharing intelligence? Because that too will no doubt come under the spotlight.
Yes, indeed, and especially after tonight, many countries around the world, and especially Western countries, would be extremely worried about similar attacks happening on their soil as well, especially so as many of them are involved, or indeed willing to be involved more, as it were, in war zones like Syria or indeed Iraq. In fact, there have been reports about shots being heard in central Paris for Syria, which might suggest that these attacks might have happened as, if you like, as an opposition to France's involvement in Syria. It has started to bomb ISIS targets very recently. So all the likelihood is that it might be linked to ISIS-affiliated groups.
As you say, it's early days and we've got to wait to get an identification of these attackers, but certainly what you say is being reflected on social media, that certain websites that are allied to militants are celebrating what they've seen happen in Paris tonight. So Nabila Ramdani, we appreciate you giving us your perspective. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Well, Delana de Souza is a France 24 journalist and was at a bar nearby one of the locations where the shootings took place.
Well, I'm in a bar in the 10th arrondissement of Paris, which is close to where the shooting happened at the Cambodian restaurant. So that's about a 15-minute walk away from where I am. And I entered the bar where I am at around 10 p.m. local time. And immediately as I entered, friends who I was with heard of the shooting that happened in the 10th arrondissement. So it was pretty sudden the minute I walked into this place. Immediately, about half an hour after, we realized that it was not just one isolated incident, that there were explosions at the establishment and gunman was on the loose, driving around in a black vehicle, was what we were told from the French police through social media. And then we tried to leave the bar, and then the bar implemented a shutdown, so no one's been allowed to leave where we are. And obviously a lot of people in the bar tonight, Friday night. We have a little over 100 people here. There's a band performing, and people are worried and they want to go outside and make calls and tell people that they're okay and safe, but they're not allowed to do that.
Well, first of all, just let's backtrack a little bit. How many attackers do the police believe were involved in this attack on the Petit Cambodge restaurant in the 10th arrondissement where you are?
Well, if you look at the picture, just posted on social media, it looks like the attack happened from outside. So I don't want to speculate right now because it's too early to say. It just was a drive-by shooting, because there's also reports of gunmen or possibly more than one gunman driving around in a black vehicle shooting at people. So I'm not sure if right now we don't know if anything is linked or if anything linked to what's happening in the Thunder Mosque, or what's happening in the 10th Ahmadi Mosque or the 11th Ahmadi Mosque, because now, before I got on this call with you, I found out that Iran actually took the first Ahmadi Mosque, the area of Leal in Paris.
Yes, we're also hearing that from our Europe editor. Katia Adler has posted something on Twitter suggesting that just that, some kind of attack, has happened at Les Halles, which is much closer to the centre of Paris.
Paris is a circle basically. So that the Ahmadi Mosque, the first Ahmadi Mosque, the 10th Ahmadi Mosque, the 11th are very, very close to each other. And these are all areas that are very crowded on the weekend night. Leal is the main train hub, if you will, of Paris, because you have a lot of long distance trains, the RERs as they're called, which come to Châtelet, which is where Leal is. So that's the main transport hub. So it's a very crowded part of Paris late at night.
Delano de Souza, journalist from France 24, giving us his eyewitness account of one of the attacks that has happened in Paris tonight. More than 100 people are said to have died in a mass hostage-taking at the Bataclan Concert Hall in northeast Paris tonight. It's feared that at least 40 more people have died in a series of bombings and shootings which have happened at several locations. World leaders have responded with shock and pledges of solidarity for France, although there's little action that any of them could take immediately. Stay with us for continued coverage of the Paris attacks.
Welcome to BBC News with me, Alice Baxter. Our top stories. Around 140 people have been killed in a series of gun and bomb attacks in Paris. In one attack at a rock concert, police say around 100 people died. 2 suicide bombings took place outside the National Stadium, where President Hollande was watching the French football team play Germany. And President Hollande has declared a state of emergency and closed the country's borders. Hello there. Now, it's been a night of terror, violence and confusion in Paris as a series of attacks have taken place right across the French capital. Dozens of people have died and many more were injured. Police have just stormed a concert hall where hostages were being held. Many of them, possibly more than 100, have been killed, but at least 2 of the attackers were shot dead. Earlier, at least 10 people were killed by government and a nearby restaurant. Several explosions went off at the National Sports Stadium during a friendly match against Germany. Well, President Hollande, who was at that match, has declared a state of emergency and sealed the country's borders. Well, our correspondent, Hugh Schofield, is in Paris for us and live on the line for us. And Hugh, you've been near the Bataclan Concert Hall for much of the evening. Latest reports that we're getting are that the siege, which has been going on there for a few hours, is now over, but we are getting reports of at least 100 we think were killed as a result of that siege. What are you hearing?
Well, I don't know if the idea that they were killed as a result of the siege is necessarily the case. I mean, it's unclear when that all occurred, if it is that big and that ghastly. I mean, it seems to be more likely that it was caused when the gunmen went in, and we have had some absolutely terrifying eyewitness reports on the French media about 2 gunmen or 3 gunmen, it's not quite clear how many, just opening fire into the crowd and having the time to reload once and again and shooting for minutes. And it seems to me that the very, very high death toll, which seems to be firming up at the Bataclan rock concert, was caused mainly in those early minutes when the gunmen went in and simply on a very crowded, packed audience opened fire, causing absolute pandemonium, as you can imagine. Subsequently, there was some kind of standoff that lasted an hour or so, and then, as you say, police and special forces moved in, I would say about an hour ago now. I mean, there were bangs about an hour ago, and it seems to be over. So the atmosphere has changed. Here, the police are evidently much more relaxed. It is over, and we're waiting, in fact, for a briefing from the Paris prosecutor. Somebody in an official capacity to tell us an official toll and what exactly happened. But I mean, the French media, they are reporting, and unanimously, a very high death toll, 70 or 80 people, if not more, in the Bataclan. And as I say, I think those casualties would have been caused at the beginning when the gunmen burst in, and rather than at the end when there was the assault by police.
As you say, Hugh, will of course have to wait for any sort of death toll to be confirmed. President Hollande actually speaking outside the Bataclan Consulate Hall as we are speaking. Of course, any number will be very difficult for him to digest, and of course it must have been a very difficult decision for the government to send in those elite forces in order to try to end this siege, a risky strategy.
Well, I mean, they'll have known stuff that we don't know about the situation inside. It's not clear at all how many hostages there were. I mean, it may be that many people got out and others were left inside it. We just don't know the situation. But going by what happened last January and the siege of the Jewish supermarket, I mean, they weigh these things up, of course, but then they are prepared to go in and act, and that's what they've done. And we'll just have to see, what the end result of the actual assault was. I mean, we think there are 2 dead gunmen. We just don't know whether in the assault the gunmen were able to open fire on other hostages. It's impossible to say, but of course it would have been an absolutely awful decision to have to take. But I think it's one that governments here have shown, and across the world have shown they are prepared to take against terrorists who act in this way. We're just being asked to move on by police.
Of course, you're alluding there to the Charlie Hebdo attack just 10 months ago in the same city, and very close to this Bataclan concert hall. Hugh, many thanks for keeping us updated. Do stay on the line for us, and we're going to be coming back to you as developments continue to unfold. Hugh Schofield there for us near this Bataclan concert hall, where we understand the siege has now ended, and President Hollande was just speaking to the press as I was on the line to Hugh. Well, let's just give you a recap now for our viewers who just joined us as to what's happened in the last few hours in Paris. Simon James has this report now on a very fast-moving story.
Terror returns to Paris, a series of attacks leading France to declare a state of emergency. Gunfire on the streets. Explosions heard at the Stade de France Stadium where the national team was playing.
Mes chers compatriotes, au moment où je m'exprime,
my dear countrymen, as I speak, terrorist attacks on an unprecedented scale are taking place in the Paris region. There are several dozen dead, lots more wounded. It's horrific. We have, on my orders, mobilized all the forces we can muster in order to neutralize the terrorist threat and secure all the affected areas.
100 are feared dead inside a concert hall. One official said attackers had thrown explosives at their hostages. The British Prime Minister David Cameron said he was shocked by events in Paris, saying Britain would do whatever it could to help. Views shared by President Obama.
Paris itself represents the timeless values of human progress. Those who think that they can terrorize the people of France or the values that they stand for are wrong.
One eyewitness said he was in a bar with his wife when gunshots were fired.
I couldn't see anything. I just heard the gunshots, people dropped to the ground, we managed to put a table over our head to protect us. And we were sort of held up in the bar because of the pile of bodies in front was too much for my wife to walk over.
Who is behind these attacks remains unclear. Simon Jones, BBC News.
Well, the worst bloodshed was at a rock concert in the northeast of the city where government was shooting hostages. Police stormed the venue, killing at least 2 assailants. Our Paris correspondent Lucy Williamson reports now from outside the Bataclan Theatre.
Well, the siege has ended here at the Bataclan concert hall behind me, and the reports we're getting are that at least some of the attackers tonight have been killed in that assault, but also initial reports that maybe as many as 100 of the hostages could have died. If that's the case, the task facing the government over the coming days in terms of securing the capital and making its people feel secure is going to be a very tough one. Tonight was a night that President Hollande described when France faced terrorist attacks unprecedented in scale. He's already called for a state of emergency and has closed France's borders to try and prevent the attackers escaping. But with so many multiple attacks across Paris tonight, the police and security services are going to have their work cut out, not just to secure the capital, but also to work out the motives and the perpetrators behind them. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, Paris.
Lucy, they're outside the Bataclan Theatre. Well, I'm now joined via Skype from Paris by Elia Haddad, and he was at the France versus Germany friendly match when the bombs exploded in the stadium. Another scene of violence tonight. Elia, many thanks for joining me here on the line. So you were at the Stade de France in the Saint-Denis area in the north of Paris. Thanks for joining us. So tell us what you saw.
So I was watching the match, and we were in the stadium with my friends. We were watching the match, and during the match, during the second half, we heard the beginning of the second half. We heard the detonation. So I thought it was thunder. Our roommate told me that it's not. It sounded like something else, but we thought it was thunder. Then maybe 10 minutes after, 5 or 10 minutes after, we heard another double detonation. What's what, sir? It was at the end of the first half. So 10 minutes after, we heard the second detonation, followed by a third. And then we started thinking that there could be something happening. And at that point, we looked inside the stadium, and people around us started looking at their cell phones. And maybe 5 minutes after, people started standing up. There was no sense of emergency, but people started standing up and started leaving, and the more time passed in the second half, the more people started leaving in a much more hurry. So we could feel the tension in the stadium because people weren't cheering anymore. So you could sense there was something very wrong that happened, and at that point. We started seeing on our cell phones. We started catching networks. We started seeing on our cell phones what happened, and then people started really pouring out of the stadium, and we felt the tension. We went out there, and we tried to leave. There was a lot of people. It coincided with the end of the match.
It must have been very confusing. I mean, we now know that what you heard was 3 explosions when the football game carried on, but in a city in the centre of town, hearing 3 bangs, it must have been confusing as to what you were all actually hearing. How did you feel when you all started to go onto your mobile phones and reports started to filter through as to what was happening elsewhere in the city? And of course, you must also have been aware that President Hollande left the football game earlier on at some point.
True. Of course, the idea of coming there was to have fun and have a good time, but it was not a good time. It's true that when we started looking at our cell phones, we felt unsafe, very unsafe. When we started seeing the information, and when we learned through the media, so through our cell phones, that President Hollande had left the stadium, we felt that something's wrong. We read that he was exfiltered from the stadium. So this word has all its meanings. So we felt that there was something wrong happening, but we felt that staying inside the stadium could be safer than going out, because we heard of the explosions and we knew that it was very, very, very close to the stadium. So we felt that
you left the stadium area once you got onto the streets immediately outside in the Sunderland area.
There was a lot of confusion, to be honest. So there was a lot of people. We felt that everyone was aware of what was happening, and just a second, I want to say something.
Outside there was not a lot of police, there was not guiding people, so there was just confusion. There was many stampedes.
Many what?
Many stampedes because of rumors about shootings and
okay, yes. So there were people trying to guide us. There were people trying to guide the people out, but there was a lot of confusion. When you say stampedes? So there were many stampedes actually.
Were you being given any official information from anyone, or was it all
No.
via telephones, via social media?
It was almost all via social media. When we were in the stadium at the end of the match, they announced in the microphone that because there was an incident, so they didn't precise more than that. They said that there was an incident outside, and they have required us to use certain doors to exit. So of course then we could feel the tension going out. And when we went out, to answer your previous question, when we went out, there was confusion, and at some point there were people running because they thought that gunmen were still there, or that there was another attack. So there were people running, maybe for a reason, maybe not. So there was some confusion. There was a lot of confusion.
And of course now since these events you've just been talking about, since watching the football game, President Hollande has declared a state of emergency. He's closed the borders, and the Mayor of France has advised residents to stay indoors and not to venture out. What do you make of all of this? What's the feeling in Paris right now?
The feeling in Paris right now, I don't know if I can sum it up, but all I can tell you is that while going back home, in Vincennes, all the shops are closed, all the restaurants are closed, the streets are empty, almost. What? Yeah, there was a deadly silence in the metro on our way back, so this is something that is not completely unusual.
Of course it's unusual. This is a Friday night, we're talking about central downtown Paris. This must be very unusual.
Yeah. It's very unusual. We're not used to this, it's very unusual, and actually when we reached a station called Gare du Nord, we were still in the RER. That was just before the RER got shut down, and before metro station lines got shut down. When we reached Gare du Nord, there was a lot of tension inside the gare, so inside the metro station. At some point, people were shouting that the station should be exited. So actually, there was a lot of tensions even inside the metros. Maybe for no reason, I don't know, but there was a lot of tension. So maybe rumors were being spread quickly. You could feel that people were not in their comfort zone at all, whether it's inside the metro or even outside the metro, in the gares, in the metro stations.
And Elia, have you noticed an increased presence of the military on the streets of Paris? We know that 1,500 military have been deployed by the president. Have you noticed a real ramping up in security on the streets in the last few hours?
We have noticed a ramping up in security near the stadium and on our way to the metro stations. So some exits, some entrances to the metro were completely closed, and you could see police as well as police cars and police vans spread around the stadium and the whole way to the metro stations there. Yes, of course, you could see increase. You can see an increase of the police force, definitely.
Okay, Elia, we're going to have to leave it there, but many thanks
and very glad to hear that you and your friends are safe. Elia Haddad there joining me live on the line from Paris. He was at that France versus Germany game at the Stade de France earlier in the evening. Well, with me here in the studios, our news reporter Ben Bland, and Ben, I was talking there with Elia about this increased military presence on the streets of Paris. We've also had President Hollande declare a state of emergency, closing the borders across the whole country. The first time that we think that's happened here since the Algerian War. This is a historic moment, really.
Well, it gives you a sense of the scale of the crisis that is facing France, and the idea of closing the borders is to stop the attackers, if they are still at large, from fleeing the country. That point you made about the extra troops on the streets, the latest figures that I'm seeing from the French news agency AFP, that 1,500 extra soldiers have been deployed to the streets in Paris. As for the death toll, there are conflicting numbers. Most reports seem to agree that it is at least 118. Reuters, the news agency, reporting it could be as high as 140. They were quoting an unnamed official at Paris City Hall. In terms of the knock-on effect this is having, I'm seeing American Airlines saying they have delayed flights to Paris. The airport, Charles de Gaulle International Airport, I believe remains open. American Airlines is delaying flights there, and hospitals have been put on a nationwide emergency plan, obviously, to cope with those who've been injured in the attack. Another interesting line that has just come through, those who are in the concert hall, that's where we believe the death toll was highest. Around 100
Talking about the
people.
Bataclan.
The Bataclan concert hall where that concert was going on. There are reports from French media that several dozen people actually managed to survive in there. They were in the upper levels and they hid from the gunmen. So details starting to emerge. We don't know how, we haven't seen figures as to how many were in the concert hall altogether, but that suggests that there were perhaps some who did survive. And this is, a situation that's moving very rapidly, and there is concern that the soft targets could be vulnerable, and to that end, schools and universities have said that they will be closed. Those in the Paris region tomorrow, schools and universities will all remain shut.
Because of course that's what's been so terrifying about this evening's developments, that all of these are so-called soft targets, not the sort of places that normally have high levels of security, restaurants, bars, concert halls, etc. Then we're going to have to leave it there for the moment. I know you're going to stay with me just to bring us up to speed, because this is a fast developing story, multifaceted, multi-layered, taking place across several locations here in Paris. Well, the French President François Hollande, he did just go on TV recently to address the nation, and he spoke of his shock at the recent attacks.
Mes chers compatriotes, au moment où je m'exprime,
My dear countrymen, as I speak, terrorist attacks on an unprecedented scale are taking place in the Paris region. There are several dozen dead, lots more wounded. It's horrific. We have, on my orders, mobilized all the forces we can muster in order to neutralize the terrorist threat and to secure all the affected areas. I've also asked for military reinforcements. They too are in the Paris area to make sure no new attack can take place.
Well, President Obama called the attacks a heartbreaking situation and an attack on all of humanity.
In the fight against terrorism and extremism.
في الحرب على الإرهاب والتطرف تمثل باريس نفسها قيما خالدة للتطور الإنساني. أولئك
Apologies for that. That was an Arabic translation of what President Obama was saying there for our sister network. But Leo Sidran is a jazz musician. He was performing at a restaurant near one of the attacks, and he spoke to us a little bit earlier about how news of the tragedy first emerged.
I was performing at a jazz club called the Sunset, which is in the first arrondissement near Châtelet. And there was a kind of a murmur that went through the crowd that something was going on. And we continued to play for a while and then took a break. And on that break, we still hadn't decided whether or not it made sense to continue playing or not. And somebody showed me a cell phone notification that there had been a shooting really pretty close by. And it just seemed almost impossible to continue playing a concert under those conditions. And so we kind of carefully encouraged people to calmly go home, and I did the same thing. And I'm in an apartment nearby right now.
Do you know what's happening outside? We understand that there's pretty much a lockdown in the city, and the mayor of Paris has said, don't go anywhere, so you might be best to stay where you are.
Well, I think that was the sense, and in fact, when the first news kind of hit, we were thinking maybe it did make sense to stay where we were. I would say within 20 minutes of that initial indication, the streets completely emptied out. I mean, this is generally a very crowded area. It's a Friday night, so it would be, pretty populated right now, and there's nobody on the street. I mean, I'm looking out on the street and I see nothing.
Well, with me here in the studio is Zajan Gahal. He's Director of International Security at the Asia Pacific Foundation. Zajan, latest numbers that we have is that around 1,500 troops have been deployed onto the streets of Paris. What do you make of that strategy by President Hollande?
There is a huge fear that there could be follow-up incidents. Keep in mind that the last time Paris was hit was during the attack on the Charlie Hebdo newspaper. And then you had the follow-up incidents involving individuals connected to ISIS targeting a Jewish supermarket, killing members of the police. So the worry is the French now believe that this incident may not be isolated. There could be follow-up cells that may not happen, but they don't want to take any chances and worry about more fatalities that could occur.
So the fear of copycat attacks, as they're called, isn't there? It hasn't yet been confirmed that US sources are saying that they strongly believe that these are coordinated attacks that have happened in Paris tonight across 7 different sites, as we believe. What's your feeling on it?
I don't think there can be any doubt that they're coordinated, they're very well synchronized, planned to hit at soft targets near the football stadium Stade de France during an important football match, also a rock concert. Keep in mind that this is a marauding attack. This is something that Europe has feared for a long time, ever since the 2008 Mumbai siege attacks, in which over 186 people were killed in various locations, hotels, restaurants, a Jewish cultural center. And people have been preparing for this type of activity in Europe, in the UK especially just now. They conducted an operation to try and counter a potential threat like this. But it shows that terrorists can still bypass it.
But to what degree can you really protect yourself against what you just described, attacks on these soft targets? Our correspondent Katya Adler's just been tweeting, quoting a security expert who went on French television to say, how can we protect and police every restaurant, every theatre goer? These soft targets, theatres, restaurants, bars, what is the solution there? You don't want to have a blanket military presence everywhere you go.
I'm afraid none of us want a police state. None of us want there to be such a tight security lockdown that people feel intimidated. But this is also something that the terrorist groups are planning and fully well rehearsed into what to target. Previously, they went after the aviation industry. The authorities clamped down on that, making our life difficult to travel, but nevertheless safer. The railway networks also came under the spectre of terrorism. Again, more security measures were implemented, especially in Paris. The incident in August when an individual armed with weapons on board on a train from Brussels to Paris was disrupted, and he could have killed many people. These soft targets are the ones that they're now focusing on because of the concentration of people. And also think about it this way, that the agenda is to create economic, political and social consequences.
What do you make of this state of emergency that's been declared across the whole country? The first time that happened since the Algerian War. At the riots back in 2005, we saw a state of emergency declared across pockets of the country. But do you think this is the right course of action by the President?
It's unprecedented post 9/11 in a Western democracy. Again, I think the thinking is because of what took place following the incident with the Charlie Hebdo shootings and the attack on the kosher supermarket. The individual connected to ISIS, Ahmadi Koulibaly, his girlfriend who helped him plan some of the activities, she fled immediately for Syria. And the worry would be that if there are individuals potentially connected to these plotters, that would they be traveling abroad, would they be connected? This type of attack we've never seen on this scale. I think it's important to ascertain whether it's entirely localized or whether there's an international connection.
to leave it there, but many thanks for coming and just talking us through some of the security implications of all of this. Sajjan Gohil, the Director of International Security at the Asia Pacific Foundation. I just want to turn around and talk to Ben Bland, our correspondent, who's with me here in the studio. Ben, I understand you've got some new information about the attackers for us.
Yeah, the Paris prosecutor is now saying that 5 attackers may be dead following the attacks across Paris. That line has just come into the last few moments from the AP news agency.
That's an increase, isn't it? Because earlier we were getting numbers of around 2 or 3.
Yeah, well, I think the important thing is his wording being reported by the agency is 5 attackers may be dead in attacks across the city. That's obviously still to be confirmed. They had initially thought that 2 attackers had been killed when the police stormed the Bataclan concert venue. As I say, that latest line now coming from the Paris prosecutor that they think 5 attackers may have been killed in the attacks across the city.
We still don't know, though, Ben, who these attackers are. No one's claimed responsibility yet. We still don't even know if this was a coordinated series of attacks. We've had several anecdotal pieces of evidence about them. One eyewitness claiming that one of the attackers inside that Bataclan concert hall shouted Allahu Akbar, God is greatest, before then firing into the crowd. That's been unconfirmed, but we still don't really know who they are and why they've done this.
No, and I think that explains why France has closed its borders, because there is this unknown element that some of the attackers may still be at large. They might be trying to flee the country, so this idea to lock down France's borders to stop them escaping. And this is probably what's causing concern for people, and it's probably what prompted the French authorities to say to Paris residents to stay indoors for their own safety. That's the latest advice to Parisians who are there. I mean, all this developing rapidly in the last few hours.
Yeah. You referred there, carry on. I was going to say you referred there to the state of emergency that's been declared across the country. As we understand, though, French airports are going to remain open, and flights and trade services, they would resume. But we were talking earlier, weren't we, about how American Airlines Group, the world's biggest carrier, so it's going to delay flights to Paris in response to all of these explosions. Well, we just want to bring you now the latest responses that we've been hearing from the French President, President Hollande.
We wanted to be here, among all those who saw these atrocious things, to say that we are going to fight, and our fight will be merciless, because these terrorists that are capable of such atrocities need to know that they will be confronted by a France that is determined, unified and pulled together, and a France that will not let itself be overawed, even if today it is expressing an infinite amount of emotion at this drama and this tragedy, which was an abomination and a barbaric act.
President Hollande there. Now, the Canadian Prime Minister, as we understand, is about to make a statement on tonight's developments in Paris. Of course, we've had messages of condolences and support trickling in throughout the evening from other world leaders, particularly from President Obama, describing these attacks as outrageous, describing France as one of America's oldest allies. We've also heard from British Prime Minister David Cameron saying that we will do whatever we can help, and that the UK is deeply shocked by tonight's developments in France. The European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker, he's also said that he's deeply shocked by developments. German Chancellor Angela Merkel, profoundly shocked at the news and images from Paris. At this time, my thoughts are with the victims of these apparently terrorist attacks and with their families and all the residents of Paris. And Ban Ki-moon of the UN also calling earlier in the night for the immediate release of hostages. And also London Mayor Boris Johnson, saddened to hear the terrible news from Paris. My thoughts and those of Londoners are with Parisians tonight. Ben Bland, our reporter here in the studio with me. Unsurprising that tonight's developments have really inspired so many leaders from all around the world to write in these really heartfelt messages of condolences, because of course we live in an increasingly interconnected world, and events that happen in a major capital city like Paris, we can't just regard them as a French affair, can we?
No, and to highlight that point, Alice, the French Foreign Ministry has said just in the last few hours that airports in the country would remain open and flights and rail services would continue despite these attacks across Paris. The ministry in a statement said airports continue to function, airline flights and train services will be assured. Though we did point out earlier, didn't we, that American Airlines has said it's delaying flights to Paris in light of what's happened. Another international element of this, Brussels, the Belgian authorities are saying that they've boosted checks on their borders, especially their border with France, after these attacks. And let me just bring you another update on the death toll. It's according to the Paris prosecutor, the death toll, he's saying now, could exceed 120. So that's the latest figure that we're hearing. Some reports, though, some news agencies reporting as many as 140. So, a lot of confusion about that, different figures. But this latest line from the Paris prosecutor could exceed 120.
And of course, still unclear as to exactly where those figures refer to then, I think, because of course these attacks happened across so many sites in Paris today, but the Bataclan Theatre, we think, being the deadliest of all of them. But as you say, Paris prosecutors now saying that 5 of the attackers may be dead in the attacks across the city there. Okay, Ben, many thanks for keeping us updated on all of these developments still continuing to unfold here in Paris tonight. A night of shocking developments that President Hollande has described as a horror. Well, with me here in the studio is Marie Villon, a French journalist. Marie, this must be very sad for you to be watching developments like this unfold in your home country from here, from England.
Yes, indeed, you feel quite powerless, and the first thing you think about, of course, is are my friends okay? And I saw that recently Facebook, for example, just put up a new possibility for people to check and say they are okay, so that's quite useful. I have dozens of people just checking, saying they are okay, or even those who live in London or
it's a new
anywhere
status update. They can say that they're safe, can't they?
Yes, that's quite important. They just have to click a little button and say they are safe, so it's very easy to do. So that's the first thing. And of course, see all this happening during the day. At the beginning was a few dead, and then 18, and then dozen, and then now more than 100. So that's of course a lot. But we've known for a long time that something big was going to happen. Even the president and the authorities said we knew something was coming. I don't think that they thought something that big would be happening really in France. It's really huge, the scale of the attack.
So you say this has been expected. Do you think that Paris has really been on a state of heightened alert ever since January, ever since those attacks on Charlie Hebdo?
Well, it's supposed to have been, yeah, that's what I say. They have the Plan Vigile Pirate that's been on basically for a few months, so they should be basically very, very much on the lookout for anything happening. And of course there was the Italy's attack. In the meantime, there was a few attacks that was basically prevented to happen. Even one I just read, I think, that was on the 15th of August in the Bataclan, so in the place basically where the main casualties basically happened apparently tonight. So they were on the lookout. Apparently it was just not enough, or they didn't have the means basically to intercept the communications, or we don't know basically of course who did that.
Yeah, but no one's claimed responsibility yet. We don't even yet at this point know whether these attacks were coordinated. Marie, can I please ask you to stay with me, Marie Villon there, because I now just want to cross over to the phone line, because I'm joined by an eyewitness to some of tonight's events. He doesn't want to be named, but he is a Parisian resident. Many thanks for joining me here on BBC News. Just tell me what you saw tonight.
Hi. I was having dinner at home when I heard the noise from the gun. So I went to the window to check what was happening,
and saw the guy with the Kalashnikov firing everywhere. And then
in Paris, where did you see this man with the Kalashnikov? Because, of course, we understand that there were multiple attacks across the city. In the north of the city, by the south of France, and in the 10th arrondissement, in the 11th. Where were you?
It was at the border between the 10 and 11. It was between the two restaurants. They went first in a restaurant not far from here, and then it came from here, and then they went to the Bataclan. So it was just in the middle. And probably in the television they didn't show up this spot because it was the place where all the police was closed practically to.
I'm going to have to interrupt you there, but many thanks for joining us there to share with us what you've seen tonight. I just want to take you live now to hear what the Canadian Prime Minister, the new Canadian Prime Minister, is saying about tonight.
Vigilance, of course, while things are still developing.
Tout au long de ces événements, nous sommes en train de faire tout ce qu'on peut pour appuyer et partager nos sympathies.
And keep Canadians informed of any new information that we receive as the situation develops.
Obviously, our hearts and thoughts and prayers go out to our French cousins through this dark and terrible time. These terrorist attacks are deeply worrying and obviously unsettling to people around the world. We have offered all of our help and support to the government of France, the people of France at this time, and we'll continue to engage with our allies around the world in ensuring the safety of Canadians and others, both here at home and around the world. We will keep people apprised as more unfolds, but I've been speaking with our national security team to ensure that everything is being done to keep people safe, and we will have more to say as we learn more about this terrible tragedy.
Prime Minister, I have a two-part question. First, you're planning to change Canada's contribution to the fight against ISIS. So I'm wondering, will these attacks cause you to reconsider in any way those plans, including the withdrawal of the CF-18s? And as well, are there any indications that Canada may be targeted? Have any additional security measures been taken? And are you going to reconsider your plans to repeal parts of Bill C-51? If you can answer in English and French.
Obviously, it is still very early moments in figuring out what is indeed happening as we speak right now on the ground in France. It's too soon to jump to any conclusions, but obviously governments have a responsibility to keep their citizens safe while defending our rights and freedoms, and that balance is something that the Canadian government and indeed all governments around the world will be focusing on. At this time, we have no information that any Canadians were either targeted or even involved as victims in these events. But obviously, there's still an awful lot to learn about what's happening in France as we speak. C'est certain que c'est très tôt pour tirer des conclusions. On va avoir bien des discussions et des moments pour examiner ce qui s'est passé et comment on doit continuer d'assurer.
We're just going to pull out of this now because Justin Trudeau, the new Canadian Prime Minister, is repeating the answer that he just gave us in French, talking in French-Canadian there from the city of Montreal. Marie Delan is here with me in the studio. Just listening there to interesting the question that was put there to Justin Trudeau, asking him about whether he might now reconsider Canada's position vis-à-vis ISIS, and also whether he might be worried about similar attacks affecting Canada. And I think this is a question that governments right around the world will be grappling with at the moment, won't they?
Yes, absolutely. And one of the reasons why basically journalists have been thinking about why is France one of the main target of Islamists. One of those is their engagement in Syria and Iraq, and before that in Afghanistan. So yes, of course, being basically involved in this kind of things happening in the Middle East is one of the reasons why they target France or any other country. So, but there's something that the President Hollande said a bit earlier today. He said, yes, we are shocked, we are saddened, but we are still standing, and we won't be bullied by terrorists. So I would be very surprised if, I don't think it's going to say, well, we're going to basically tame down our involvement in Syria or anything. If anything, I think it's going to even perhaps bolden them want to do more, so that basically they can show that they can't be bullied.
Well, let's move now from the grand politicking and the sort of macro review of what all of this means on a global diplomatic stage. Let's get back to the detail and what people on the streets of Paris are feeling right now. I just want to return to our Parisian resident, our eyewitness that I was talking to earlier on the phone before I rudely cut him off to listen to Justin Trudeau. Thank you for holding the line. Thank you for talking to us here on BBC News. You were just telling me earlier, before we crossed over to Mr. Trudeau, that you were in between the 10th and the 11th arrondissement in central Paris, which is where a few of these attacks happened tonight, right in downtown Paris, near to the Place de la République, and you saw this gunman wielding a Kalashnikov. Just tell me again what you saw.
Yeah, I went to the window, and there was this guy with the Kalashnikov firing. It was at the corner, so I was firing in all the direction of all the street in this corner. So then a car came, he entered into the car, and then went away with the car. And actually, there were three guys. That were not killed by this killer and escaped. And so I didn't expect the situation was so terrifying. Then I checked better from the window. I saw a crowd of people going in the direction of body on the ground. And so I called the police, but many people were calling the police. And then I went down the street. It was probably not the best things to do, but I realized that there were in a bar many other bodies, four or five bodies.
You saw around 5 or 4 dead bodies on the street. That must have been.
Yeah, but this bar is like in the Parisian style, the table on the street. So the people who couldn't move. They were between the wall and the table, and they were on the ground between the chair and the table. So then there was some cars with the driver. There was a car with the driver and the person, the passenger, also dead. And since this car was in the middle of the corner, it was blocking the situation. So also for the ambulance was difficult to arrive. Then the police arrived. They asked it to go home. At the beginning was difficult because there was a lot of people around. They make us understand that the terrorists were still everywhere. So then everybody went home, and I stayed at home practically without light, not to. And then I went on the back of the apartment not to stay at the window because it was unsafe.
Yeah,
And
we know that
few
the
minutes-
mayor of Paris has advised people and has done so for several hours now to stay inside, effectively creating a lockdown in central Paris. What you've been describing, it's just extraordinary. This is central downtown Paris, it's vibrant, it's Friday night, it's an area that really epitomizes the cafe culture of Paris. So the sights that you've seen, you must still really be digesting them all. I also understand that police snipers took up positions in your apartment and you then had to hide in the bathroom.
Yeah, actually, a few minutes after they asked me, they knocked at the door and they asked me if they could use the apartment because my apartment has it was on the scene, so they entered in the apartment and I haven't seen what happened after because actually they didn't ask me to stay in the bathroom, but it was probably the safest place in the apartment. And I stayed there, also not to deconcentrate the guy, and so I don't know what happened. I stayed at the window probably. He was fully armed, and probably 1 hour ago, 2 other guys came helping him, and 20 minutes ago everything finished. So they said thank you and they went away.
And how do you feel now? Do you feel safe? Do you feel scared? How do you feel?
It's a difficult question because now probably the situation is under control, probably. But last time when happened the Charlie Hebdo, the following day was not safe at all, and I was probably lucky that in that moment I was at home having dinner because if by chance was going to a supermarket to buy something, I could be in the middle of everything. So it can happen. Yeah.
It's interesting that you recall the events of 10 months ago, the attacks on Charlie Hebdo, and of course also on that Jewish supermarket back in January. Since then, do you feel like your city has changed? Has Paris become more heightened to these sorts of attacks? Did you sort of feel that another attack was coming?
This is a more I prefer to leave geopolitics people and experts to answer the question because the feeling is yeah, there was 2 attacks in less than 1 year, but it was not the only place where it was the museum and the beach in the north of Africa. There were other spots just after Charlie Hebdo, so and the problem in Syria, not only in Syria, so probably yeah, Paris was twice in 1 year, probably a bit more, but probably the world is changing, it's not only Paris.
Yeah, but your city has certainly been through a lot this year, hasn't it? Many thanks for joining us here on the line, here at BBC News, telling us what you've seen tonight. Very glad that you and your friends are safe. An eyewitness there joining me there live on the line. He didn't want to give us his name, but some really interesting details coming out, including seeing a man wielding a Kalashnikov in between the 11th and 10th arrondissement, between the sites of some of this evening's attacks. We have, of course, been hearing from the French President François Hollande, who, of course, had to prematurely leave that football game, that friendly game between France and Germany tonight at the Stade de France, once he heard of these attacks. It's been a difficult night for him, and, of course, he's been talking to the press. Let's have a listen to what he's been saying.
We wanted to be here, among all those who saw these atrocious things, to say that we are going to fight, and our fight will be merciless. because these terrorists that are capable of such atrocities need to know that they will be confronted by a France that is determined, unified and pulled together, and a France that will not let itself be overawed, even if today it is expressing an infinite amount of emotion at this drama and this tragedy, which was an abomination and a barbaric act.
François Hollande here in the studio with me is Ben, our reporter Ben Bland. Fighting talk there from François Hollande, calling these attacks atrocious and abomination, and saying that France will stand firm in the face of them.
Yes, let me just bring you the latest on death toll. The French public prosecutor, Paris public prosecutor, saying that they believe the death toll is at least 120, and they believe that at least 5 of the attackers have been killed. Of course, we don't know how many attackers there were. We don't know if there are others who are still at large, but those are the latest numbers that we're getting from the Parisian officials. There has been obviously an international reaction. I've just seen a moment ago coming from New York in tribute to the victims of this. The One World Trade Center spire has been lit in blue, white and red in honour of those who've been dying in Paris. Lots of cities really showing their solidarity with Paris, an international city, at this very difficult time. As far as we know, airports are still open, transport is still functioning, but I did see a tweet from the official Paris city Twitter account saying that tomorrow all city amenities will be closed. Now that includes Parisian schools, museums, libraries, gyms, swimming pools and food markets. So that's the knock-on impact of this tomorrow. But I mean, even before you begin to consider that, the shock of what's happened will still be sinking in for people in Paris who are there tonight.
Yeah, I'm actually just reading a latest line through from the Reuters news agency then. A Saudi Arabian source saying that these attacks show the need to eradicate dangerous and destructive threats to global security. So similar tough talk there as that we just heard from President Hollande. You referred to it there, Ben. This really is now a city in lockdown. We've had this state of emergency declared across the whole country. The first time that's happened since the Algerian War. We had a similar situation across pockets of the country following those riots in 2005, but nothing on this scale. The mayor of Paris has advised people to stay indoors. We were just hearing there from our eyewitness. This is now a city on heightened alert. We think about 1,500 troops have been deployed onto the streets. The live pictures there show that, what one would usually expect to see in downtown Paris on a Friday night, loads of people outside the cafes, instead just replaced with these lines of ambulances and a very strong police presence. This is a city on lockdown.
It is. We've also heard this deployment of an extra 1,500 troops onto the streets of Paris. Twofold the reasons for that, I imagine. One, to provide reassurance to people, but secondly, from a very practical point of view, to try and track down where the remaining attackers, if indeed there are other attackers.
Because of course that is the immediate concern. We are led to believe that many of these attackers are still on the loose. They're out there in Paris.
Well, we don't know. We simply don't know how many there are. But as a precaution, the borders for France have been locked down. Neighbouring country Belgium has increased checks on its borders because, of course, the concern is, if they are at large, that they could flee, and that's the last thing that the authorities want. So, the deployment of the troops, a big step. Those extra 1,500. And as you say, Paris residents, for their own safety, being asked to stay indoors.
Yeah, and as you were saying, Paris attack toll could reach 125 assailants killed so far, we think. Ben, for now, many thanks. Well, a short time ago, we also heard from Igor, an eyewitness in Paris. He found himself caught between two areas where he could hear shooting.
I saw people running from Le Public towards Bataclan. Which is when I exited the restaurant I was in. But then there were also people running from Bataclan towards the Republic, and so we were caught in the middle. Everyone's been caught by surprise. We were all, there's a lot of restaurants in this area, and people were all checking their phones, I just saw the news on Twitter that there had been a massive shooting 20 meters from where I was. So we basically all tried to take shelter, and now the people from our restaurant have taken shelter in a building. We're not in the street, the police have blocked the whole area. They just told us to run, they basically gave us 4 different directions so it's which to run, so they basically didn't really know where the danger was. And so I decided not to run in any direction and just find a building where I could hide for a bit. I'm on my own, I was completely by chance here. I wasn't supposed to be here tonight, and so I'm on my own, and now both of my parents are calling me extremely worried. I must say, since January, I haven't seen an awful lot of police reinforcement around the city. In the very wake of the shooting, Charlie Hebdo, there was a massive police force, but in the past few months, I haven't really noticed much difference. It sort of died down, and right now, I think now people need to understand that Paris has become a very dangerous city.
You're watching BBC News. Just to let you know, if you're joining us, what you're seeing now, live pictures from Paris where those deadly attacks have happened. The key points, let me just recap for you. More than 120 people have been killed in those attacks at various locations across the city. The vast majority of those, we're being told, at least 100 were killed at a concert hall, the Bataclan concert hall, where gunmen took people hostage. The Paris public prosecutor is saying that 5 attackers may have been killed as well. We don't know how many attackers there were in total. France has declared a national state of emergency, has closed its borders as a precaution. It's advising people in Paris to stay indoors for their own safety. And there's still huge questions about the actual numbers of people who've been killed. Those numbers have been rising rapidly in the last few hours since these attacks happened. There were also explosions at the Stade de France, where France were playing Germany in an international friendly. The French president was there and left as soon as all this began to unfold to take control of the situation at the Interior Ministry. There have been messages of solidarity and support from leaders all around the world. We will bring you, of course, the latest as we get it here on BBC News.
Welcome to BBC News, broadcasting at home and around the globe. I'm Daniela Retorto. Our breaking news this hour. At least 140 people have been killed in a series of gun and bomb attacks in Paris. In the worst incident at a concert by an American rock band, police say around 100 people died. 2 suicide bombings took place outside the National Stadium where President Hollande was watching the French football team play Germany. The President has declared a state of emergency and closed the country's borders. Thank you very much for joining us. More than 100 people have been killed in a series of shootings and explosions in Paris. The worst bloodshed was at a rock concert in the northeast of the city where gunmen were shooting hostages they were holding. Police stormed the venue, killing at least 2 assailants. Earlier, at least 10 people were shot dead at a nearby restaurant. Several explosions went off at the National Sports Stadium during a friendly match against Germany. Some reports said that these were suicide bombs. Simon Jones has our very latest report.
Terror returns to Paris, a series of attacks leading France to declare a state of emergency. Gunfire on the streets. Explosions heard at the Stade de France stadium where the national team was playing. Police stormed a concert where gunmen were shooting hostages. More than 100 are feared dead here. France's president visited the scene with a defiant message to those behind the attacks.
We wanted to be here, among all those who saw these atrocious things, to say that we are going to fight, and our fight will be merciless, because these terrorists that are capable of such atrocities
need to know that they will be confronted by a France that is determined, unified and pulled together, and a France that will not let itself be overawed, even if today it is expressing an infinite amount of emotion at this drama and this tragedy, which was an abomination and a barbaric act. The British Prime Minister David Cameron said he was shocked by events in Paris, saying Britain would do whatever it could to help, views shared by President Obama.
Paris itself represents the timeless values of human progress. Those who think that they can terrorize the people of France or the values that they stand for are wrong.
One eyewitness said he was in a bar with his wife when gunshots were fired.
I couldn't see anything. I just heard the gunshots, people dropped to the ground. We managed to put a table over our head to protect us. And we were sort of held up in the bar because of the pile of bodies in front. It's too much for my wife to walk over.
Who is behind these attacks remains unclear. Simon Jones, BBC News.
Well, the worst bloodshed was at a rock concert in the northeast of the city where gunmen were shooting hostages. Police stormed the venue, killing at least 2 assailants. Our Paris correspondent Lucy Williamson reports from outside the Bataclan Theatre.
Well, the siege has ended here at the Bataclan concert hall behind me, and the reports we're getting are that at least some of the attackers tonight have been killed in that assault, but also initial reports that maybe as many as 100 of the hostages could have died. If that's the case, the task facing the government over the coming days in terms of securing the capital and making its people feel secure is going to be a very tough one. Tonight was a night that President Hollande described when France faced terrorist attacks unprecedented in scale. He's already called for a state of emergency and has closed France's borders to try and prevent the attackers escaping. But with so many multiple attacks across Paris tonight, the police and security services are going to have their work cut out, not just to secure the capital, but also to work out the motives and the perpetrators behind them. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, Paris.
Lucy Williamson there. Well, with me is our World Affairs correspondent, Richard Galpin. Richard, as we pause to try and take stock of what happened, it's worth remembering that this will happen in about, 30, 40 minutes or so?
Yeah, I mean, this is clearly a pre-planned, very well coordinated attack, and it was on multiple sites. I mean, we think at least 5, possibly more, different sites which were attacked more or less at the same time. And it seems certainly that what some of the witnesses, people who survived some of these shootings have said is that clearly the people who carried out the attack had training. They knew what they were doing. In one particular attack, I think actually on the Bataclan concert hall, the gunmen went in, automatic weapons, they were firing, emptying a magazine, and then reloading and firing again. So they knew exactly what they were doing. So this was clearly a very well coordinated attack.
Similar information too coming out from the cafes as well. There's witness statements that the gunmen were shooting at random, and once they ran out of ammunition, they reloaded. So they knew what they were doing. I guess that leads us then to the next question as to the who. We have had no claims of responsibility. We've had a little bit of chatter on Twitter about some jihadist groups celebrating these attacks. But are you surprised that so far we've had no one saying who did this?
Not really. If I remember correctly, with the Charlie Hebdo shootings, it took some time before there was a claim, and actually that was eventually, it was not ISIS, it was Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, the group which is based in Yemen. So I don't think it's necessarily a surprise that there hasn't been any claim at this stage. You know, and obviously now for the security forces, the absolutely key thing is to make sure that there are no gunmen still at large. And it's very, very unclear at this stage. They're saying that they have killed 5 of the gunmen, particularly those at the concert where the police stormed that, and they ended up killing several gunmen. But what has happened to the others, we really don't know. Whether the 5, that means all of them, or whether they're still people at large. And obviously that is the real big worry for the police and obviously for the people of Paris.
Let's be clear on that point, that we don't know how many people were involved, we don't know who was involved, and that very important point, we don't know how many, if
are still on the run. In terms of the security response from President Hollande, declaring a state of emergency and closing the borders, what do those things mean in practical terms?
Well, in terms of the state of emergency, I think that was really important, because what it means is that it requires all public spaces to be emptied. And that's obviously what the authorities want to do. And this was a Friday evening, a lot of people out on the town enjoying themselves. So the idea was to try and get people back to safety, not people wandering around, get them back home, get them inside safe buildings. So that was absolutely vital. And then obviously sealing the borders, because they would be concerned that if there are people on the run, they might be able to escape and get into another country and then get away. So those were two obviously really important moves. They have also drafted in extra soldiers. We understand about 1,500 soldiers have gone into the city of Paris right now, obviously to play a role potentially in the manhunt, but also to be able to guard buildings, and obviously that will be very reassuring for the public. They can see that there is a very big security presence to protect them.
Richard, you mentioned the Charlie Hebdo attacks. We were only here 10 months ago on a smaller scale, but yeah, an incredibly tragic one. My thoughts keep returning to why Paris, why France? You know, there is some analysis. There are a lot of French nationals who've gone to Syria and Iraq. That's assuming and making, you know, the assumption and speculation that this is Islamic terrorism. But why this city in particular?
That's a very good question, because it's possible. Is one potential answer, isn't it? That the Charlie Hebdo attack, as far as those people who carried it out are concerned, this was a successful attack. They hit the target they wanted to do. And clearly there are people, obviously, the Charlie Hebdo attack, these were actually French nationals who carried out, they were living in the area. What we don't know is whether the gunman who's done this is the same thing or not. But, you know, obviously it's absolutely crucial. We can't emphasise it enough now that the police will obviously be working very, very hard to try and find these people, and therefore find out who they are.
Okay, Richard, thank you very much. You'll stay with us for the next few hours. So let's just bring you what the French President François Hollande said. He went on television to address the nation, where he spoke of his shock at the attack. He declared a state of emergency, as we've been describing, and closed the country's borders. Well, within the last hour, he and top government officials have visited the Bataclan concert hall, the scene of some of the worst bloodshed. And speaking outside of the hall, President Hollande described the assaults as a horror. He said the nation would stand firm and united against the attackers. Let's listen.
We wanted to be here, among all those who saw these atrocious things, to say that we are going to fight, and our fight will be merciless, because these terrorists that are capable of such atrocities need to know that they will be confronted by a France that is determined, unified and pulled together, and a France that will not let itself be overawed, even if today it is expressing an infinite amount of emotion at this drama and this tragedy, which was an abomination and a barbaric act.
President François Hollande, just in the last half an hour or so. Can I take you to New York next? That is one of the buildings there on the site of the Old World Trade Center site, and it's in the colours of the tricolor, the French flag, blue, white and red, the Freedom Tower that we're seeing there at One World Trade Center. So solidarity there from the city of New York, which suffered so badly in 2001 with the city of Paris. Let's just remind you of what's happened in France over the last 2 hours. More than 100 people have been killed in a series of gun attacks and explosions in Paris. The worst bloodshed, as we've mentioned, was at a rock concert in the northeast of the city, where gunmen were shooting hostages. Police stormed the venue, killing at least 2 assailants, although there have been reports now that that's perhaps 5 assailants who were killed there. Earlier, at least 10 people were shot dead at a nearby restaurant. Several explosions went off at the National Sports Stadium, the Stade de France, during a friendly match against Germany. President Hollande was at that match. He was escorted out by helicopter. He's now declared a state of emergency and closed France's borders. He has promised a merciless fight against terrorism. Richard Galpin, our World Affairs correspondent, is with us. Richard, a merciless fight against terrorism. Unfortunately, we heard words like this from President Hollande after the attacks of Charlie Hebdo. But you do have to wonder what on earth the government can do. These were soft targets. They cannot have security outside of every bar, every theatre, every restaurant.
Absolutely. It's an extremely difficult thing to actually counteract. Very, very difficult. Although this seems to be a big operation, isn't it, involving multiple attacks with multiple gunmen. This isn't the most difficult thing to deal with, obviously, is the lone wolf attacks. And this is not that. This is, as I was saying before, this is a pre-planned, very well coordinated series of attacks involving a lot of gunmen. It's a whole different thing. And I have to say, perhaps might have thought that given what happened earlier in the year with Charlie Hebdo, that the intelligence services would be absolutely working overtime to prevent exactly this kind of attack. And it's, the scale of this attack is just so enormous. As we've heard, this is the most serious attack on Paris for decades, perhaps even going right the way back to the Second World War. And actually, just one point to mention. The French news agency AFP is saying that the gunmen, when they went into the Bataclan concert hall, were shouting that this is the fault of Hollande, the French president. He didn't have to intervene in Syria. So if that quote is correct, that would then obviously give us a very clear indication of who's behind this, that this is some kind of Islamist militant attack again in Paris.
And the question is too, who's capable, I guess, of carrying out these attacks? As we were describing, they seem so well coordinated, so professional. These men were very well armed. They had a lot of ammunition and a lot of equipment. Now you'd think, perhaps, that these people would be on some sort of radar, on some sort of watch list for French intelligence services.
Well, that's right, but again, it's difficult. There was an attack going back several years in Mohamed Merah down in Toulouse, where he killed a number of people, including soldiers, and made an attack on a Jewish school. And he was someone who was actually known to the French intelligence services. But, I think they would argue that it's always difficult. You can't track very large numbers of people all the time. To be able to track one person, you need, I think what the exact figure is, but between 12 and 20 people on the case. So you need large numbers, and it's very difficult to actually keep a hold of exactly what all these people are doing at the same time. And clearly there are quite a lot of potential suspects within France. We do know that hundreds of people have gone from France to go and fight in Syria and Iraq alongside the militant groups there. So, there's obviously a lot of people that the security services need to keep their eyes on.
Let's listen now to Charlie Pitt, a freelance cameraman in Paris who was 30 metres from the bar where people were shot just after 9 p.m. at local time. Let's have a listen.
Time in the 11th, about 75 metres from the Derek Cafe that was hit about 10 past 9. I've just been to the supermarket, just walked past the front of the cafe. It's a popular, typical French cafe. People were sitting outside, and I'd literally got about 30 metres when I thought it was a firecracker to start off with, and then it went on, it got louder, and it went on for about a minute. Everybody sort of dived for cover thinking it was gunfire, and it went on for about a minute. Then there was a pause for about 15 seconds, and then it all started up again. We all sort of left, and then it sort of calmed down a bit. So I walked back to the front of the cafe, and there was a whole pile of bodies, probably about 7 on the left-hand side, and about 4 that had been sitting at the tables outside on the right-hand side, and a lot of injured. I saw a woman who'd obviously been shot in the leg, and then the police turned up, and now we're sort of shoved about 75 metres away. A lot of fire brigade, a lot of police, a lot of army patrolling the streets, keeping.
Yes, first you can see these, you can see. What are those?
Hold exactly what all these people are doing at the same time. Clearly there are quite a lot of potential suspects within France. We do know that hundreds of people have gone from France to go and fight in Syria and Iraq alongside the militant groups there. So, there's obviously a lot of people that the security services need to keep their eyes on.
Let's listen now to Charlie Pitt, a freelance cameraman in Paris who was 30 metres from the bar where people were shot just after 9 p.m. at local time. Have a listen.
Gone in the 11th, about 75 metres from the Dalek Cafe, which is about 10 past 9. I've just been to the supermarket, just walked past the front of the cafe. It's a popular, typical French cafe, people are sitting outside, and literally got about 30 metres when I thought it was a firecracker to start off with, and then it got louder. And it went on for about a minute. Everybody sort of died for cover because it was gunfire. And it went on for about a minute, and there was a pause for about 15 seconds, and then it all started up again. We all sort of left, and then it sort of calmed down a bit. So I walked back to the front of the cafe, and there was a whole pile of bodies, probably about 7 on the left-hand side, and about 4 that had been sitting at the tables outside on the right-hand side, and a lot of injured. I saw a woman who'd obviously been shot in the leg, and then the police turned up, and now we're sort of shoved about 75 metres away. A lot of fire brigade, a lot of police, a lot of army patrolling the streets to keep